So part 2 is psychosocial crisis resolution. According to the systems theory, human behavior is a result of active interactions between people and their social systems. Some parts of this theory include boundaries, differentiation, entropy, equifinality, feedback, and homeostasis. Those are just some of them. I love this theory. I'm a huge believer in this theory. I think that whatever you put into your environment is what you're going to get out of it in most situations, and Norma is a prime example of this. So when we were talking, we both agreed that even though she was struggling at the time, as a teenager, with her family and with herself, feeling lost, the struggles are what made her who she is today. Without these struggles, she may not have had the motivation or the willpower to get out of the situation she was in, or put herself through school, or want or need to marry her husband. So I just thought that was really interesting. According to Lipschitz El-Hawi, which is one of the authors of an article that I did for my annotated bibliography, teens who face a lot of adversity can show signs of regression and behavioral issues. So regression is when someone shows signs of previous developmental milestones, if that makes sense. So for example, you could have a teen who wets the bed or has a temper tantrum. But instead of doing this back then, Norma now works with me at Child Protective Services, and she serves these abused and neglected teens. She works a lot with the teens, and she really likes it, which I'm surprised. I work with the younger kids, and sometimes I couldn't imagine working with teens. But this article also went over how vicarious trauma social workers can, experience, especially when working with the maltreated teens, just because they'll test you and sometimes they seem not to make any progress in their treatment, and so it's really hard, it's really frustrating. But the end of the article showed, with a case study, how if the social worker and the teen both don't lose hope, then treatment will work for the most part, or some progress will be made. So I really actually enjoyed that article too. The additional theory that I looked at is the cognitive development theory. This is Piaget's theory. So it describes how people develop their capacities to think, learn, process information from birth through their teenage years. So as an adolescent, Norma would be in the formal operation stage. This is the stage where people learn hypothetical deductive reasoning. It's kind of critical thinking, and that's where his theory ends, unfortunately, was with the teenage stage. It doesn't really get into the whole adult thought process or if anything changes at all. But central to this theory are schemas, accommodation, and assimilation. And I'm just going to touch on each of those. So a schema is your internal idea and representation about the world, different aspects of the world. It's how you store information to make sense of what happens around you. In order to change or add to your schema, you can either have accommodation or assimilation. So accommodation is when you change it. It's because when you learn new information, it's different than what you previously thought. So therefore your concept of whatever you're thinking of changes. Assimilation is when you learn new information and it just adds to or confirms what you already believe. So I like this theory as well, even though it kind of ends early, like in the adolescent stage. I just think those three things are, each person can relate to those at least. Some of the limitations for Erikson's theory, because there's so many individual differences in development, placing people in one stage can be difficult. For example, I believe that Norma would also fall into the categories young adulthood and adulthood. So when we were talking, she mostly focused on her adolescent self, but then some of the things like graduating high school and going to the Sheriff's Academy was definitely young adulthood, and talking about her husband being together for 25 years, that's adulthood. Another limitation is that societal norms are always changing. So when Norma was growing up, it was unusual or even frowned upon for a woman not to have children. Norma never had children, so describing her full adult life with Erikson's theory could be difficult. She didn't really touch on why she never had children. I'm not sure if maybe her husband didn't want them, or if maybe they couldn't. She didn't really want to get into it, so I didn't pressure her to ask or anything. But I just wanted to put that part in there, about societal norms, especially when she was growing up in the 60s and 70s. For a young woman to not have kids, I'm sure was not heard of. So finally, a limitation. Erikson's theory lacks relevance for some ethnic and minority groups. Like I said previously, Norma was a young white female, so she doesn't really fall into an ethnic or minority group. So I can't really confirm that this limitation is relevant to her life stages. I'm sure there were certain things, if she thought really hard, that maybe she did feel oppressed about, or I'm sure she felt unheard, in her family at least, because she was an only child and she didn't have anyone to talk to about her parents' divorce and her messy home environment at that time. But I don't think that's the same as the oppression that some minority groups go through. And these are my references. If you want to check out any of the articles that were in my annotated bibliography, they are listed. I really enjoyed talking to Norma and learning about her life, and I hope you guys enjoyed this PowerPoint. Thank you.